video and audio recording are strictly prohibited. Thank you and enjoy the performance.
Hello, everybody, and welcome. I'm Bob Sherman. This young man here is Lowell Liebermann, and these younger folks around me, not these two are slightly older than younger, but these are the wonderful young pianists who are here for the 8th New York International Piano Competition. And we're right in the middle, or almost at the end. Tomorrow will be the last day. There'll be forehand, the competition for piano four hands. There will be master classes during the day, and then, of course, the awards evening following at 7 o'clock. So, first of all, Lowell, make yourself comfortable, as I will in 1 second after I introduce the two gentlemen who are making it all possible, the Messrs. Stecher and Horowitz.
It's always wonderful to be at another New York International Piano Competition. It takes almost 2 years to prepare for each one. And when we go home on Friday night and we wake up on Saturday morning, we're already thinking of 2018. And that's the way it is. It takes an enormous amount of work, but it's worth every moment that we put into it. Just look, they've been marvelous, and the music has been absolutely stupendous all week.
I also want to welcome everybody, and I would like to say that Robert Sherman, who has been with us since the very start in 2002, has been very, very supportive of the foundation, Stecher and Horowitz Foundation, and extremely supportive of young people. His mother was a great teacher, a great pianist, Nadja Reisenberg, and he's very much aware of it, and he's just been so supportive of our foundation. And every year, every 2 years, we commission a very outstanding American composer to give our young people the opportunity of learning a new work, which is very rare. And we are so honored to have a composer of the stature of Lowell Liebermann, this year's composer. Okay.
So, you get to write a piece that all these folks had to learn from scratch.
Yes, I'm sorry, everybody.
Yeah. So, what went through your mind as you began? Were you looking for something that was technically demanding? Were you looking for something that is interpretively interesting? How much marking did you make in the score?
Well, you know, I don't know that I approached writing this piece differently from any other piano piece I would write, knowing that it was a competition. You know, for me, it's the music itself that's always the impetus and the inspiration, not necessarily the events surrounding it. So I just try and write, you know, the best piece I can. My piano music has a way of almost always turning out rather difficult, so I didn't have to really think about making it especially challenging or anything. But I was very interested in writing a piece that would really show great musicality, give the pianists an opportunity to show their musicality.
Do you give them leeway interpretively? Or are you one of these composers that says everything is a metronome marking an exact in and out and diminuendo? And
well, it's a little bit of both. The thing is, I am a composer who's very specific in my markings. I mean, one of my ideals in that respect is Beethoven, who was incredibly specific. No matter how specific you are, there is still room for a certain flexibility, and musical playing demands a certain kind of flexibility. but it's always a balance of the freedom and being true to the score, and that's where the true musicality of the performer shows, I think. A lot of my piano music is always written with rubato in mind, that kind of pianistic flexibility, and I find that often a lot of performers approaching a piece of new music feel they have to play it with a certain metronomic straitjacket, and they don't allow themselves the same kind of flexibility that they would in something like Chopin or Beethoven or whatever, and that's something very necessary for these pieces.
One of the, I guess, most popular piano pieces is your Gargoyles.
Right.
And there have been, whatever, 15 recordings of it.
I think about 25 at this point.
Oh, well, I was looking at last week's schedule. But, so you have 25 different versions of them.
Yes.
Does that bother you that some people have strayed more off the path that you intended?
You know, you can't let it bother you because, you know, it's almost like, I think of my pieces as I think some parents might think of their children. You know, they grow up and they think, my God, did I give birth to that? And then they go out into the world and they do what they want, and you don't have much control over it. I mean, I've heard fantastic performances of pieces, and I've heard truly terrible performances of pieces. In fact, there was one premiere, I was sitting in the last row, one premiere that I got on my hands and knees and crawled out of the auditorium so that I wouldn't be there when they motioned for me to stand. I was so mortified. But no, you know, you have to have a certain detachment. And I think I've been very lucky with performers and performances. I certainly was spoiled very early on because I went to Juilliard, and so I grew as a composer, having my pieces performed by fellow students who were, you know, people like Stephen Huff and you know, musicians of that caliber.
I think his Gargoyles was the first recording I had.
Yes,
of
it was, I think. Yeah. So, yeah, I'm generally happy.
Now, you're a pianist yourself.
I am.
Does that enter your thinking? Do you write differently for the piano than you would for the flute or whatever?
Well, the piano is certainly a comfort zone for me. Everything I write begins at the piano. I sketch at the piano, and then later on, I'll sometimes work things out. If it's an orchestra piece, I'll work out the details at the computer or nowadays. But definitely, I'm a frustrated pianist. I would have loved to have performed more in my career, but there just wasn't the time. I couldn't personally balance the amount of time you really have to put in to be a performing pianist with the amount of time I needed to compose. So generally my performing was limited to chamber music where I could have the music in front of me and things like that. But certainly the experience of performing, I think, is very important for a composer to remember even things like the tactile pleasure of playing an instrument, because I think that performs, you know, certain things are just fun to play. They just feel good to play. And I think that does come into my music.
Now, we're going to hear, actually literally, we're going to hear performance of the commissioned work, which are the two impromptus.
Yes.
These kids had to learn the piece, as far as I understand it, with no further instructions. They couldn't call you up and say, well, what did you mean by this? Or how do you feel about this third measure here?
There was a question about a wrong note that was relayed by one of the teachers. So
you
that
write wrong notes?
Not deliberately.
But coming back again to the beginning, what was in your mind to impromptus? The name has a certain connotation. You think of Chopin, of
Well,
course.
the name, like most of the names for my pieces, came after the piece was finished. For me, I mean, music is about music. It's about the notes, it's about the melodies, it's about the manipulation of the musical material. It's not about sunsets or, you know, pictures or this or that. It's more like, I sometimes describe the role of a composer as working with emotions, abstract emotions, the way a painter would work with color, an abstract painter. So it's, you know, the thing is, people often ask me what I meant by a piece and what does the piece mean. And the truth is, if I could put it in words, I wouldn't have to write the music. You know, it's like poetry. It's something non-specific.
Do you find it easier or more difficult when you do have words, like your operas or the ballet, which is a storyline?
Right. Well, my two operas were, in a way, the most enjoyable thing I ever wrote, because having the words, having the libretto removes a great sense of anxiety of where you're going. When you're writing a purely instrumental piece of music, you have to conjure up basically something out of nothing. And one of the challenges of composing is that you're always trying to find a reason to write one note rather than another note. And those reasons kind of build as the piece progresses. You know, a piece of music kind of forms its own logic. But trying to find what that logic is within a piece, you know, it can be very much like stumbling in the woods in the dark until, you know, you get a ray of light.
All right, we're going to hear your stumbles in the wood. And Caressa Vandekas from Canada. These the artists that you will hear, by the way, were chosen by, I'm not sure what, names in a bowl or something. It was a random choice. It was not a selection by Stecher and Horowitz or even you, I don't believe. So anyway, where is Caressa? There you are, right in the front row. So you're going to play the pieces for us now, yes? Okay, we're going to go down and listen. So, Carissa, tell us, from your vantage point, what went through your mind when the music arrived?
Wow, that's a lot of notes. Sorting through it all at first, as with any piece, was a bit difficult. I think me, as well as the other contestants, had a bit of rhythmic trouble maybe in the second impromptu with the 3 against 5 against 11 and fitting that all together. But eventually, I guess, just getting it all to flow and sound like an impromptu, and what Mr. Liebermann was saying about the flexibility, that kind of helped, because we didn't need to worry so much about fitting every note. Correct me if I'm wrong, I hope, but fitting every note exactly where it needs to be and just letting it flow.
But you had to come to that decision yourself, because you just heard what he said. Now you had to learn the piece without that knowledge. So you came to that. It's one of the fascinating things, actually, because when you play most of the standard repertoire, there's a tradition that's built in. You know how it's played. There are tremendous variations interpretively, but you know basically the way it goes and the kind of phrasing and so forth. Here you had to figure it all out for yourself. Was that an exciting challenge, or was that something you want to put behind you and try to forget about it?
It was alarming at first, but I think it was a really, really great experience, because I think in that way you really get to discover your own voice in a way, and you get to see what you think works and how you can deliver the music in a way that makes sense. And it's great that we can hear Mr. Liebermann talk now, and we can kind of compare. How did we do?
Uh-huh. And was it difficult or, again, exciting to play the piece for the composer with him sitting right under your nose, so to say?
That was so scary.
Yeah, he does look a little scary when you come down to it, but he's pretty a nice guy, and he wrote a pretty wonderful piece, I think.
Fantastic piece.
All right. Do you have any thoughts about what you heard, the kind of performance, and did it fit the mold of what you were thinking of?
Before that, I just wanted to comment about the playing for performers, playing for composers, because once Garrick Olson came to my house to play my 8th Nocturne for me, and you know, Garrick Olson is he's a very intimidating guy, and a pianist I had admired since I was young, and I was quite nervous at meeting him and coming to my house, and he sat down at the piano to play my piece, and he said, "I'm so nervous." And I just thought that was hysterical, because I was quite nervous. But having been a performer, I actually premiered a piece of Ned Rorem's in front of him. And so I know what that feels like, playing for a composer, and it is nerve-wracking.
Right.
Yeah.
All right. Now, this is an opportunity for the rest of you guys to ask whatever you will of Lowell Liebermann. Ask him why he wrote this, that, or the other.
You can ask, I might not answer.
Well, that's a problem we'll solve when we get there. Any of you? You have a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity here, so don't all speak at once. Otherwise, I have to choose somebody, and that's always difficult. You look like you want to say something.
Do I?
Yes. Oh, you have the mic already. See, I knew you grabbed it away before anybody. Okay. First of all, what's your name? Where are you from?
Tracy, I'm from Cincinnati, Ohio. Oh, wow, okay.
If you don't have a question, give us a comment on what your reaction was to the piece when you were learning it.
Okay. Well, I obviously, nobody knew what you were thinking when you wrote this. There weren't many, notes attached to the score. So the way I learned it was I listened to a lot of your other compositions. Mm-hmm. And
well, that's clever.
I really like the part in the first impromptu with the trill and then the melody kind of floating above the trill. And I was wondering if you had orchestrated that, because it sounded a lot like your flute sonata, with the accompaniment being the trill and the ostinato, and then the flute kind of playing the melody. I was wondering if that was like a deliberate orchestration on your part.
No, certainly not deliberate referencing the other piece, but composers have their little stylistic idiosyncrasies, and so you get things that remind you of other pieces. But in terms of orchestration, I do think of the piano very much as an orchestral instrument. It's just not one color, and these pieces are very much about color and how you will have 3 or 4 different lines going on at the same time, and each of them needs their own color to bring out, just to articulate what's important at the moment.
Okay, well, thank you very much. Now, who else has a question or a comment or a thought or a feeling about the piece itself? All right. Wait.
Hi, great T-shirt.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah. So give us,
Okay.
yeah, tell us your name, where you're from.
Okay, my name's Xia Qi, but people call me Dragon because my last name Long means dragon in Chinese.
Oh,
And it's a very unique last name. And nice
is that a
nickname.
good dragon or a bad dragon?
Both.
Okay.
But yeah, I was wondering, I really like, I learned pieces like sort of different. I never listened to recordings online before I even learned the pieces. So I want to have like my own kind of interpretation of the piece. And then one thing that didn't make sense to me was that I think 2 weeks ago we got an email saying that there was a wrong note at the last page from going to a B natural or C flat going to a
There's
B
a C
flat.
flat, B flat, yeah.
Right. I was wondering why was that wrong note?
Oh, that's just computer, copying.
No, why didn't the B natural make sense?
Because that's not the note I wanted.
There's a story that a singer went to see Jerome Kern because she was going to do one of his songs. And while she was waiting for him, she sat down at the piano and played through it. And when she looked up, he was standing there, and he said, there is a C sharp on my piano, and I chose not to use it. And that's kind of it.
Well,
The
actually,
composer knows.
I want to get back to that because it's interesting. Because I remember when I was a student at Juilliard, a young student, it was very much the time when kind of it was accepted that the notes were sacred, but everything else was kind of up for grabs, the dynamics, the articulation, everything, and that performers would just take the notes and then do what they wanted with them. And it was actually Jacob Latiner, who I studied piano with, who really was one of the first people to drill into me the equal importance of all the markings in a piece. And what I've come to realize as a composer is that what comes first to a composer is really the whole dynamic emotional framework, and you're then filling that in with notes. And it's almost in certain cases that you could change the notes easier than you could everything else. Okay. And yes, a B flat or a B natural could have worked just as well, but I happen to choose the C flat, B flat. Okay. So.
All right. Any other questions or thoughts? Well, let me. We got a volunteer. Right, you got your own mic now.
Okay. Wait, is this on? Okay. I know what the politically correct answer is, but do you actually have a favorite piece that you've written? If so, what is it?
No, I don't. I don't. I've written a lot of pieces. I have a couple of least favorite pieces, but I'm not going to name those. But it's often the latest piece I wrote is my favorite because I'm more absorbed with that. I forget my pieces. When you've written over 100 pieces, and
You know, years ago, I interviewed Aaron Copland, and he said that it's lovely that everybody plays Billy the Kid and the fanfare and all that. He said, but what about the other pieces that nobody plays, my stepchildren? I really wish those would come. Do you have any pieces that you love, but nobody else seems to agree with you? I mean, those 100 pieces.
Well, there are certainly pieces that are performed less than others.
Does that bother you?
Listen, something has to be performed. I take a pretty blasé attitude towards it all, I think. I'm happy for the pieces that are performed. Yes, I'd love everything to be performed, but happy for the ones that are performed.
Let me ask a question for our two boss men here. Why do you, hard enough for all of these young kids to learn a brand new piece within a very comparatively short period of time, why do you make them memorize it? Why can't they just have the music, at least to have that, not crutch, but at least to have that assistance?
As performers ourselves, having been on the concert stage for about 45 years, you don't know a piece until you memorize it. And you feel so much more at home when you're communicating with the music, looking into space, looking at the keyboard, looking at your associate who's at the other piano, and having to turn a page to the next one and to the next one is totally distracting. And I feel that one doesn't know anything that one has to recite and do on a daily basis or an evening basis that you can rely upon a score. It's just, would you go to the theater? Would you want to see actors and actresses putting on Shakespeare, reading the score from the play and just in front of the stage? There's no meaning to it. And that's my personal feeling.
What about chamber music? I mean,
That's
everybody
different.
has a score.
That's different because you cannot rely upon your memory when other people are involved. And you're at risk. If, God forbid, you have a memory slip, or if you skip a measure, or you skip a beat or so, it can throw everybody off. And I think it's required to use your music for that purpose.
All right. Very good. Thank you. Thank you. All right. Further questions for our composer-in-chief here? All the good stuff seems to come from this side. All right, go ahead. Except for you, our dragon man.
Hi. I'm actually trying to get into composing this year because I go into college this fall, and I wanted to try doing some composing on the free side when I'm not doing piano. Like, how would you suggest I should go ahead and start, this, huge field of study? Like, what should a young composer be mindful of, and what I should study and try to do?
See, your competition is on the way.
Well, that's a lot of questions rolled into one. You should write, first of all. Just write, because that's what composers do. You learn by writing. All of my composition teachers, it's funny, they've all said to me, composition cannot be taught. And the truth is that once you know the basics of theory and orchestration and everything, these are all rather prosaic things that you can learn from books. Anybody can learn these things. But the actual writing of music is something very different, and especially, I think it was easier in Mozart's time when there were certain ways one was supposed to write, and there were accepted forms and a certain accepted harmonic language. Nowadays, there's such a variety of styles and different techniques. It's often very confusing for young composers. How do they find their own style? What do they do? People are telling them this. And the thing I tell my students is don't ever let anyone tell you what kind of music you should write. You write the music that you would want to hear. And that's all I do. That's all I've ever done. I write the music that I would want to hear if I was sitting in an audience.
But that would seem to pose an insurmountable problem for you as a teacher, because a student comes to you with an electronic score, with something that is not what you would like to hear. How do you work with such a
Because
composer?
okay, what I try and do as a teacher is I don't write their music for them. I don't show them how to write music, but I try to give them the tools to stand back and listen to their music as if it was written by somebody else. So for me, it's all about building a sense of self-criticism, to have that detachment, to listen to your piece and not just be in love with it because you wrote it, actually to think about what you've written and make some very conscious decisions. Is this what you want to be communicating? Because one of the things I've always firmly believed is that music, like all the arts, is a form of communication, and no matter how complex the idea is that you're communicating, it's the job of the artist to communicate that idea as clearly as possible.
Obviously, if you're writing, and we're talking about a piano piece, you could play it, you know what it's like, you know what it does sound like.
Right.
When you're writing an orchestral work or an opera even, do you make changes after you hear it, or can you really hear it in advance in your head?
Not that often. I mean, sometimes dealing with especially opera, you know, when you have an orchestra that's in a pit, all of a sudden you're dealing with unexpected balance things just on base, you know, based on the acoustics of the hall you're in. So that's a case where you have to make adjustments. There are unexpected things. But generally, I tend not to write something down unless I know what it's going to sound like. You know, so, and that's what the studying prepares you for. That's what the orchestration prepares you for. Sure, there are occasional surprises, but it's not like, I mean, I don't see how somebody could write a piece of music not knowing what it's going to sound like when it's played, you know.
Who were some of the composers that, I don't know, I don't want to say influence you, but who were some of the composers that you admired when you were at Juilliard?
Well, when I was a student, I could easily rattle off the composers who I felt influenced me, and they began with, you know, Bach and Beethoven, and went
those old guys.
Went to Shostakovich and Britten, who were still alive when I was a student, very much alive. Other composers, Fauré, Alcan, you know, all kinds of composers. What I find now is that even certain music that I don't necessarily like influences me, that everything I hear kind of gets thrown into the frying pan and stirred up, and some element of something might come out, you know, that I don't even expect.
Yeah, fascinating. All right, let's, yes?
May I just make
Norman?
a comment? Actually, having heard your compositions 22 times,
I'm sorry.
it's amazing hearing the same work by 22 different people. I can look at, whether it's Aaron, or I can look at Menju, or Angie, or Prudence, I can look at anyone here and tell you exactly how their performance differed from the next person's. It's your piece. I never heard it before you submitted it to us, except Mel and I tried it before we even distributed it. And
Could you play it?
if I practiced it, it's not an easy piece.
Yeah.
But it's amazing that there were really 22 different interpretations. That this piece that takes 8 minutes has 22 different interpretations. Can you imagine what happens around the world, you know, if they get hold of it? But, which of course they will. Everybody's going to be playing this. Everybody wants to play Lowell Liebermann. But Mel just has one thing to say.
Actually, the competition has many aspects, many spokes to the wheel. And today, more than ever, young pianists, young artists must be involved with contemporary music. And I think that's one of the reasons that we've commissioned a new work since 2006. When we commission the work, we don't really tell the composer what we want, except we tell them we want a 7 or 8 minute work. And having Lowell Liebermann as a composer is a great, great honor for us. But we do this for our contestants, because you will never have the opportunity of basically doing a world premiere and having the composer here. And I think this stemmed back from when we were perhaps in our 20s, upper 20s, and we were celebrating our 10th anniversary as a duo piano team.
Early 30s.
28 to be exact.
Truth in advertising comes out here.
And we decided, rather than to give a concert in Carnegie Hall or Town Hall, why don't we see if we can have a work commission for Stecher and Horowitz? And we never, ever thought that the commission would be accepted, and Walter Piston did accept the commission, a great, great composer. And it was interesting, he asked us what we wanted. And we told him we wanted to work about 20 minutes, because our orchestras were looking for solos for about that period of time. And we wanted something to be equal. In other words, the first piano part to be as difficult as the second. Because at that time, there were teams that would ask for a more difficult first piano and a little easier second piano. So we asked for that. And he also says, what would you like? And we couldn't tell him what we would like. We just said we would like to have the last movement a great movement, which would be very, very exciting. And we waited for how long? 3-4 months.
At least.
We only had to wait 4 months for your piece, I think, right? And during the 4 months, we were thinking, what do you think it's going to be like?
No, I have to interrupt. We waited 4 months when he finally said he would start the third movement. But he had been writing a concerto for Rostropovich for the Boston Symphony, and he said that has to take precedence because they have a world premiere that they've announced already. And so we waited for that. But it probably took a year or so, a little more than a year, to finally get the work.
But I would say for you, the young people that we deal with, probably one of the most exciting concerts ever, one of the two most exciting, was playing the world premiere at Dartmouth of the Piston Concerto, not knowing what the reaction would be. But it was such a great, great thrill for us and an accomplishment. It was just a grand evening. That this is what we want to do for young people today, because it's very, very important to work on contemporary music as well as your romantic and Baroque and classical. So again, I say that having somebody of the stature of Lowell Liebermann is most gratifying and important to us, for you young people.
Could you just expand on that a little bit more, sort of playing devil's advocate here? There's so much great music by Chopin and by Schumann and by every other composer you can think of. You can spend your life with Beethoven, as or Bach, as some artists have done. Why is it important to play all types of music, including contemporary?
Well, I think it's important as a musician to be able to know all styles. I think it's important also when you're preparing a concert in a major city where they are looking for the artist to do contemporary music today. It wasn't that important when we started touring in the 60s and the 70s. We did do contemporary music. We did the Piston Concerto for us. We did a Stravinsky work for 2 solo pianos. But today,
Lutoslawski.
Right. But today, if you want to have a successful career, you really must delve into the contemporary. I'm not an advocate of playing a complete contemporary concert, but I think you have to have certain works that are of a high standard in the contemporary field today.
And this fits the bill.
Let me get back to you, Lowell, because they've raised a very intriguing point. How do you get audiences to want to hear contemporary music. It's so difficult for an audience to say, oh, gee, it's a piece I never heard of. I can't wait to hear it. That used to be the norm in the 19th century. But now, kind of, if it isn't Beethoven and Schubert and Mendelssohn, composers they feel comfortable with, they're a little scared. I mean, after how many, 125 years later, you see Schoenberg on the program, you run the other way. It's sort of, it hasn't held. Modern theater, totally accepted. New films, obviously, all the time. What's wrong with music? Why doesn't it have the same?
Well, first of all, I'm glad that I don't really have to worry about this problem. That's a problem for administrators, for the people who have to fill the halls. So I don't worry about that. I can only speak personally.
Well, of course.
I have had no problems with audiences with my music. You know, once they're there and they're seated and they hear it, they seem to like it. Getting them, you know, this whole thing, I think classical musicians, I think the classical world has almost talked itself into this doomsday scenario of shrinking audiences and nobody likes new music. And I think people were saying that in the 50s. I think they were saying it in the 1850s, you know. Yes, it's a different world from when Mozart and Haydn were writing the new music because all you basically heard was new music. But it was a totally different structure because they were writing for royalty, for these small courts. And if you think how small that audience really was, I'd say we're probably in a very healthy state right now. I mean, I think there's probably a bigger audience now for classical music than there ever has been.
When you said before that you want to write music that you enjoy, that you would want to hear, do you specifically write music that you think an audience will want to hear,
No.
or is that their problem?
Well, I think it's important for any artist to be aware that they are writing for an audience because it's a form of communication. But when I think of an audience listening to my piece, I think of a hall filled with 2,000 of me. I'm aware that someone has to listen to it, but I try and put my place. You know, I don't think, oh no, this is going to be a hard sell for an audience, or I have to do this. I don't do that. I also don't think of, oh, what is the critic going to say? I just, you know, after a certain point, you write what the music tells you to do. The music takes over.
Obviously, if there's a commission that you've accepted, that's the piece you write.
Yes,
For whatever.
yeah.
If somebody wants something for two bassoons and saxophone, that's what you're going to write.
Well, I wouldn't, but they could ask for it.
But do you write it all something that nobody's asked for, but you particularly want to do anyway?
I almost never, because I simply haven't had the time. Because
Well, that's a good, good development.
Well, the thing is, I almost from when I graduated Juilliard, I was working full time on commissions, which is a great luxury for a composer to be able to do that. But
Very few have
But the
done.
flip side is then you have to write what people are willing to pay you to write. You can't write just whatever piece you want to write. I happen to like certain restrictions because they then become creative challenges. So unless a piece is something, you know, totally ridiculous, like a, you know, contrabassoon octet or, you know, whatever, I look on the particulars of a commission as incentives to be more creative.
Okay. Now let's get back to our young people here. I'm looking at this side because that's where most of the questions come from, but how about from here? Or comments, how you felt about the piece, or whether you think you're going to play it again, or want to play it again, or anything else. I see a hand over there.
I want to know how you write your pieces down when you compose them. And for me, it would be very interesting if you say us something about our piece, how you wrote our piece.
Well, like I said before, I always write at the piano, and I sketch at the piano in ink, not in pencil. I tend to scratch out rather than erase. Piano music, I will generally write entirely at the piano, and there will be a full score in manuscript. When I'm doing an orchestra piece, that'll be sometimes more sketchy, and then the details will be filled in at the computer nowadays, so that there's actually no full manuscript of some of the bigger orchestra pieces or the opera scores or ballet scores. I compose very much from A to Z. That is, I tend to compose in the order that the piece will be listened to in. I mean, sometimes I'll get an idea that I know is going to go at the end of a piece, but I'll just sketch it and then go back to working on the piece from A to Z. As far as the actual process of composing, that's a little more difficult to articulate, and it's different for different pieces, but you know, you just get a piece of material that you know is a seed that the piece can grow out of. And I think of my pieces as being very organically created, that everything grows out of that initial idea. And whether that initial idea is a chord or a melody or a group of pitches or an accompanimental idea or something else, it can be different for different pieces, but I think very much of keeping a piece organically unified and tight.
Do you have a specific work schedule? Do you go from 8 to 12 and 1 to 5?
No, I wish I had the discipline to do that. You know, I'm very much one of these composers. If I have a year to write a piece, I will think about it for 11 months. and I mean, actively thinking and worrying and not liking anything I'm thinking of. And then, you know, deadlines are a great inspiration. They're the best inspiration. If it wasn't for deadlines, I don't think I'd get anything finished ever.
Well, that's an interesting point. And of course, our pianist here had the deadline. How long did you have to work on the pieces? Somebody? Yeah, why not?
It's a couple of months, wasn't it?
For this composition.
8 weeks, right?
Yeah, 8 weeks.
8 weeks.
Yeah.
I think I heard 8 weeks. Is that right?
Yeah,
Okay.
we send it out 8 or 9 weeks in advance. And we have the confidence, because their repertoire is quite vast, that if we give them the 8 or 9 weeks and we specify it has to be memorized, there's very rarely a problem with it. And I think I would like to compliment all of them here that it's a big feat to learn something like these two impromptus in 8 weeks, be able to get up and perform it well. We congratulate them for that. And many people ask us, as you did before, why do you feel that they have to memorize it? As performers, as Norman said, we just feel that it has to go into the subconscious and come out. And we know, and it's much more difficult for two pianists to play contemporary music because one is thinking, you have two minds, but it's easier for one pianist, something happens, you can fix it. We can't fix it that easily. But we do have the confidence that all of you are able, and at every competition, we are proven correct, that you do have the ability to memorize it in 8 weeks. And we will always do that. We may make it 6 weeks in the time, I don't know.
I just want to make one comment that at the time we sent out the Lowell Liebermann, we also sent the music for the ensemble, the one piano, four hands. And we specifically made mention of the fact that this does not have to be memorized. Mm-hmm. see.
Because of, again, you have the
That's
two
right.
different artists, and they have to
That's
not
right.
only play together, but
So
think together.
tomorrow, we're going to see what happens, because we paired them when they came to New York on Sunday. They have met their partner on Sunday, and they're going to be playing together for judging on Friday.
How different, from your vantage point, how different is one piano, four hands from two pianos?
Well, physically, one person pedals. We're at two pianos, you have your each set of pedals. Aside from that, the keyboard is divided into half, and you have a limited range on the keyboard. But many times, I might have to extend my hand over Melvin's, or he might have to extend his hand over mine, and depending upon what the score dictates. And there are many, it's more difficult, one piano, four hands, physically. But as far as emotionally, there's much more, I will say, you have much more of a sweep, a grander feeling. I mean, when we get up, whether we played the Schultz, Evelyn, Strauss for there was nothing. I felt I was in Vienna playing, you know, I had the whole keyboard to myself. And if I was restricted with Melvin at the other side, I would be only one half of a dancer. That's it.
But if we did do something one piano, four hands, and it was originally written that way, like the Schubert F minor Fantasy, we would play it on one piano, four hands. But we both felt much more freedom on the two pianos.
What was the idea? I think the New York Piano Competition may be the only one that has this four-hand requirement. What was the idea? You're choosing pianists who are going to be essentially solo pianists. What was the thinking behind making this?
It all comes down to money. You need two pianos everywhere you go to play two piano music. For the competition, well,
Oh, that's true.
yeah, you know, then there's logistics. We couldn't get really two pianos.
No,
very
no,
good.
that's not what I meant. What I meant is, why did you want a four-hand component to your competition when all the other competitions don't feel it's necessary?
Well, we feel that being a collaborative pianist, playing with another pianist, is very, very important. And rather than not having an orchestra, we have an accompanist for the concertos. But we felt this brings two young people, two different minds, and we'd like to see how they work during the week together. And I would say that tomorrow, when we will both be upstairs listening, that it's quite amazing when we hear 11 teams, what they've accomplished from Monday to Friday. They are really outstanding. They'll be outstanding performances.
It's like chamber music for us. This is the chamber music experience, except that you're not having strings, you're not having any other instrumentation, and they're playing together in an ensemble that is really very, very challenging.
Well, let's turn back to Lowell Liebermann. You have a two-piano concerto, right?
Not a two-piano concerto. I have a couple of two-piano pieces, and actually...
But they're not concertos.
No, and there's a sonata, and there's variations on a theme of Mozart, and there's a piece called Daydream and Nightmare. Well, the Daydream and Nightmare is actually for two pianos, 8 hands.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. But no two-piano concerto yet.
But at least when you're writing that way, do you keep in mind what these guys just said, that you have to have an independent freedom, and yet...
I've not written anything for piano duet yet. But yeah, the of course the two piano 8 hands deals with that you've got two people at each piano. You know, it's you know, people mentioned there were a lot of notes in this piece. When you write two piano music, that's a lot of notes for a composer.
I remember Henry Cowell said that he had these tone clusters, which are, you write a top note and a bottom note and a big black line between them. And he said when he went to Russia, he found out that the music was paid by the note. So the good part was he had stacks of rubles. The bad part was he had stacks of rubles, which he couldn't take out of the country or do anything with. But so you write a lot of notes just for free. So come on, who else has questions or thoughts? This seems to be the good side of the room. Am I missing? Aha! We have a representative from our side here. So, what's your name? Where are you from?
I'm Sophie from Austria,
Austria. Wow.
and I was interested if you ever weren't able to finish a piece for a deadline.
No. I mean, most people who commission pieces expect you to be like months late. They kind of build that in. There have been a few cases where pieces have been a week. Actually, I called you guys up and asked if I could have another 2 weeks, and you said, sure, it's fine. They're not going to be sent out.
Because we told you to start early. We didn't.
Yeah, but I was dealing with a full-length ballet where I was dependent on waiting for the scenario for the ballet, which I didn't get until a year later than I was supposed to, and so that kind of knocked my whole schedule off balance. So I think this piece was 2 weeks after the original deadline,
But
I
I
think.
believe you did meet the deadline.
No, I think it was 2 weeks after.
Really?
Yeah.
Close enough.
But I called to ask if it was okay, and you said, yeah, sure. Yeah.
Before I go back to the other side, any other thoughts from here or questions? Anybody? All right, your last chance here. All right, this is my good side here. Who has some thoughts? You look like you have a thought. What's your name? Where are you from?
Oh, me?
Yeah.
Ryan, and I'm from North Carolina.
All right. And beyond that, did you learn this with a Southern accent? How did it work for you?
I don't have a Southern accent, but
Why not?
well, I wasn't born in North Carolina. I was mainly raised up north in Chicago. So.
I see.
But don't really have any questions, I guess.
Well, what did you feel about learning a brand new piece in limited time and knowing also that you had to memorize it? Was it an exciting challenge, or was it a difficult and awkward one?
I think it was really pressuring for me because actually in my case I had been put like as an alternate for the competition, so I didn't hear back, and I had like 5 weeks to, instead of like everyone got like I think 8 to 10
you had a
weeks.
real rush job.
So I was really frantic about meeting the deadline for like actually memorizing it, but I ended up like doing it and it was fine.
Did you memorize it separately, or just by working on the piece you got to know it?
Yeah, the thing about it is, especially with this kind of modern piece was like a bunch of notes. I had to first rely on like muscle memory first to like really get in the groove of memorizing it, and then after I got it in my fingers, then I was able to really make the piece my own and put my own, really artistic personality into it.
Okay,
So.
very good. Very good. Lowell, what are you working on now? What's next on the agenda for you?
I'm working on nothing right now.
Really?
I'm taking a break.
Wow.
Yeah. No, because the last year of composing was very intense. I basically had to write something like 3 hours of music in a year.
You're talking about the ballet?
Well, the ballet and the symphony and this piece. So it was really a very. It was the first year in my life, I think, that I was actually composing every day, because I knew I basically had to get a minute of music written almost every day in order to meet the deadline. So it was tremendous pressure. And so after that, I just needed some time away from writing. So I'm doing house renovations right now, and gardening.
But this it's an interesting point. You said you might get a minute a day.
Mm-hmm.
This suggests that you work on that 1 minute until it gets just the way you want it, as opposed to working on a section of a piece without completing any one set of measures?
Well, not necessarily. I mean, it can work both ways. But, you know, I think for most composers, a minute of music in one day is a lot of music to write. It's because it takes a long time to write, and especially if you're talking fast music. You know, a minute's worth of fast music is a lot of notes. So that's really kind of a lot of music, and when you have that pressure of just having to do it day after day after day, it gets very...
Do you ever have the equivalent of writer's block? I mean, you ever look at this blank page and you say, what am I going to do now?
It's not so much writer's block as being super critical and not liking what's coming out. And then, again, deadlines have a way of curing that. You know, you just have to get it down. You know, I find this with my young students. A lot of my students want to talk about the process and how do you deal with writer's block. And I tell them just put notes down. Because if you don't put the notes down, you don't have anything to work with. But if you put any notes down, then you can look at them and say, okay, what's wrong with this? And then you can fix it. So, you know, the thing is, you know, waiting around for that brilliant idea to come is not really how it works. You have to put something down and start chiseling at it and molding it. Actually, it was very valuable, a thing that David Diamond made me do, which was to look at Beethoven's sketchbooks and read this book that analyzed Beethoven's sketchbooks, because Beethoven would write an idea, and usually it would be the most banal, uninteresting idea, and then he would analyze it and say, what's wrong with this idea? Well, the rhythm is too regular, so he'd make 10 more sketches where he'd try changing the rhythm. And then he'd get to a certain point and he'd say, okay, now what's wrong with it? It hits the pitch E flat too many times. So he'd make 5 more sketches where he'd change the melodic outline. And so he'd go through these different and you can see in the sketches, very clear thinking thought process. So you'd start out with this one maybe not very interesting idea, and by the time you had 20, 30 sketches at the end, you'd recognize something from one of the Razumovsky quartets or one of the symphonies or something. So it's really that sense of working with the material that is technique for a composer. You know, and really, I think what a lot of young composers feel is that somehow the idea has to come out unadulterated and pure, and if it isn't that thing from the onset, somehow it's not valid. And the truth is, you have to get down and dirty with the material and tear it apart and transpose it and add notes and take away notes and stitch things together.
I think we've all seen these movies of composers who are just get this inspiration. They sit down and the whole piece pours out of them in a flash. So we assume that's how you do it. You know?
I mean, it wasn't even true of Mozart. I mean, that's the cliche about Mozart. But he sketched. We just don't have his sketches. You know, they didn't survive the way Beethoven's did.
I've never understood how these early composers who did not have computers, did not have any of the current tools, how they could just physically write that many notes, fill that many pages with
let me tell you, it is exhausting, because my first opera, The Picture of Dorian Gray, I wrote by hand with pen and ink. The orchestral score is about 800 pages of large orchestral score, big orchestra, and I'm left-handed, so it's very difficult to write with ink, because, you know, you... And when I finished writing that score, I felt like I was going to die. I mean, it was exhausting, and you get hand cramps. These computer programs have been such a blessing for me. Because, you know, it used to be you'd write an orchestral score and you would have to leave 3 to 6 months built in to have the score and the parts copied. You would have to factor that into every commission. And now, you know, I orchestrate directly into the computer. And when that's done, there's just a little bit of editing that's needed, and I can print out a set of parts in a day or two.
Yeah.
So it's really, that has speeded up the composition process tremendously.
All right, we're going to hear your impromptus once again. And this time the pianist is Brian Le. And Brian, where are you? So, where's the mic? So what was your reaction when you first got the music and you knew you had 8 weeks to learn and memorize it?
Well, I was really excited to see. I sort of like ran through the parts that I could play, and it sounded nice, so I was excited.
And what about the parts you couldn't play?
I was a little scared, but I learned it.
So is this the kind of piece you're likely to put into your repertoire now that you know it?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Yeah.
Good answer.
All right. Just fill in very quickly where you're from and who you study with.
I'm from Silver Spring, Maryland. I study with Nancy Breath and Boris Slutsky.
Ah, Boris Slutsky studied with my mother, so we're in the same camp here. All right, you're going to play the piece for us, the impromptus, if you will. Well, thank you so much. Really, I was just saying to Lowell, it's a beautiful, really beautiful piece of music, and we have heard it now twice, and it has not lost any of its freshness and attractiveness in the second round.
The third time it might.
Well, we'll see. We'll get a third one tomorrow, right? Because the judges will have selected one of these folks as the, quote, best performer of this particular work, your commissioned piece. So we will get yet another opportunity to hear it tomorrow. I'm very curious if any of you have, and I'm looking again at this side for a change, if any of you have impressions about the forehand piece that you are going to be performing tomorrow, and how you felt about forming a sort of, well, we're talking about writing at a deadline. You had a deadline to form a real close partnership. Any of you have thoughts on how it was and how it felt? Anybody over there? All right, I'm going to call up my dragon fella here because.
Okay.
What was it like to kind of make an instant friend, make an instant partner?
Well, I mean, like, all of us want to get the pieces right. And I feel like the difficulty and also the most important thing for us, the two piano kind of thing is, I feel like being really one of the very hard thing to do on one piano with four hands is to show pulse, to have the same the same feeling of rhythm. We're playing Mozart and two gazebo dances, and feeling it really like a dance instead of metronomic beats. It's very important to put together. And that's limited because we have limited space on the piano, on the keyboard. Physically, you can't really show that to someone. And also, like, as mentioned before, we only have like one person pedaling. So gestures, you're limited. And getting the same kind of feeling and agreement on the beats and on the rhythm, on the, you know, I feel like that's very important and it's very hard to achieve, especially in this deadline.
Well, of course, that's the most difficult part, I would imagine, forming that understanding with your partner. Had you played much forehand music before you came to New York?
Not much forehand, but I've done two piano Mozarts. And I mean, my old teacher back in Colorado, he arranged a few of the Russian composers, and they put together a chopstick variation.
Oh, yeah.
And that was really fun to play, but it's very like bottom oriented. But so no, not much.
All right. Well, we will look forward tomorrow, as we've said, to the day, most of the day given over tomorrow to the forehand performances. There will also be master classes by various members of the faculty here and the judges. And then comes the grand awards concert, and that's at 7 o'clock tomorrow. All of these are open to the public. There are tickets available for the 7 o'clock. Everything else is on the house here. And most of all, I am greatly indebted to Lowell Liebermann, not only for having written these great pieces, but for giving us so much insight into the life of a composer and the way the music evolved. So thank you very much. Yep.
May I just say one thing? Tomorrow night at the awards ceremony, we will be giving out prizes and finalist awards. But the philosophy of the New York International Piano Competition, and I will say it again tomorrow, but I'm saying it tonight to all of our outstanding contestants, that in our eyes, you are all winners. So you must feel that you are here because you were outstanding when you sent your DVDs in. And at the awards program, naturally, we all want to be winners. I won't be looking at any of you tomorrow to think that if I looked at you, I'm the first prize winner or the second prize winner. But you're all winners tomorrow
Well, you
night.
guys don't even know yourself who's
No.
We won't know until 15 minutes before.
They don't let you in on what's going on here.
No,
huh?
they don't send the message down until 15 minutes before.
No, actually, as you know, it's all done computerized by a man, Dr. McBain, who does it for many of the leading competitions throughout the world. And he's busy. He's going to be busy tonight and tomorrow, and he'll call us probably 30 minutes before we go on stage.
And
So the suspense continues.
even the
then.
jury does not know until 6:30 tomorrow night.
Even the jury itself.
That's correct. We will be feeding him numbers tomorrow morning, and we'll get the answer, as Norman said, late in the afternoon.
Very good, very good. So what will the award ceremony be, other than awarding the prizes, but there'll be performances also, yes?
Yes, the first prize winner and the second prize winner will be asked to play a work. And I'll be telling you this tomorrow. I told you before, but you should pick a work out that's about 7 or 8 minutes. First prize, second prize. The first prize of the ensemble will be playing, and also the first prize, the prize for the best performance of the Lowell Liebermann work. And that's going to be very difficult to judge.
Well, I would imagine at the level we've heard just
And
today.
after the awards are given out, we get poor again, and we start raising money for 2 New Year's.
I see. But meanwhile, the results are almost at hand. Tomorrow, the last day of the 8th New York International Piano Competition. What a thrill it has been to meet all of these gifted young pianists. I'll hear more of you tomorrow, I dare say. And of course, to spend this time with Lowell, which has been a joy in itself. So thank you very much all.